My sister stole my identity, opened credit cards in my name, ran up $78K in debt. My parents said, just forgive her. She's family. I filed a police report. At her arraignment, my parents showed up to testify against me. Judge asked one question that made my mother cry. The first thing I noticed was the silence in the courtroom. Not the heavy, expectant kind that precedes a verdict, but something else, a held breath, a room full of people waiting to see what would break first. My mother was crying. Not the quiet tears I'd seen at funerals, but something rawer, something that seemed to come from a place she'd spent 63 years pretending didn't exist. My father sat beside her, his hand frozen halfway to her shoulder, as if he'd forgotten how to comfort her. Or maybe he'd just realized there was nothing left to comfort. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses perched on her nose and a face that suggested she'd heard every possible configuration of human cruelty, had asked only one question. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I grew up believing that family was the thing you protected at all costs. Not because anyone ever sat me down and explained this explicitly, but because it was woven into every interaction, every holiday, every carefully constructed narrative about who we were and what we meant to each other. The Brennans, good people, salt of the earth. The kind of family that showed up to church on Sundays and volunteered at the food bank on Thanksgiving and never ever aired their dirty laundry in public. My sister Meredith was 3 years older than me, and for most of my childhood, I worshipped her in the way younger siblings often do, with a desperate, unconditional devotion that overlooked every cruelty because the alternative was too lonely to consider. She had a way of making you feel chosen, special, like you were the only person in the world who truly understood her, and in return, she understood you in ways no one else could. When I was 8 and she was 11, she'd sneak into my room after our parents were asleep, and we'd talk for hours about school, about boys, about the future we were going to build together. You and me against the world, Nat, she'd whisper. Promise me, no matter what happens, we stick together. I promised. Of course I promised. I was 8 years old, and my sister was my entire universe. What I didn't understand then, what I wouldn't understand for another 23 years, was that Meredith's love came with conditions I couldn't see. Fine print written in invisible ink. She loved me best when I was smaller than her, weaker. When my successes didn't threaten hers, and my failures made her shine brighter by comparison. The first time I outperformed her at something, a spelling bee in 6th grade, 3 years after she'd placed 4th in the same competition, she didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. I thought I'd done something wrong. I apologized for winning. My mother took me aside and explained gently that Meredith was sensitive and that I needed to be careful not to make her feel bad about herself. You're the strong one, Natalie. You can handle a little disappointment better than she can. I was 11 years old, and I learned that my job was to make myself smaller so my sister could feel big. By the time we were adults, this dynamic had calcified into something I barely noticed anymore. Meredith got the bigger bedroom when we visited our parents for holidays. Meredith got to choose the restaurant, the movie, the time we'd meet. Meredith's problems were family emergencies. Mine were minor inconveniences. When she got engaged at 28, the entire family orbited around her for 18 months of wedding planning. When I got engaged at 26, my mother's first question was whether I could move the date because Meredith had mentioned possibly wanting to take a vacation that summer. I moved the date. When Meredith's marriage fell apart after 3 years, an affair, his, not that it mattered, she moved back in with our parents for 8 months, and we all tiptoed around her grief like she'd lost a child rather than a husband who'd never particularly liked her. When my fiancé and I broke up a year later, mutual, painful, the kind of slow dissolution that leaves you wondering who you even are anymore, my mother called to ask if I'd remembered to send Meredith a birthday card. I don't say this to paint myself as a martyr. I participated in this dynamic. I enabled it. Every time I shrank to make room for her, I made a choice. Every time I swallowed my hurt and told myself that family was more important than fairness, I reinforced the lesson that my needs didn't matter. But understanding how you got somewhere doesn't make it hurt less when you finally see where you are. I found out about the debt on a Tuesday. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a Tuesday in March, cold enough that the windows in my apartment were fogged with condensation, ordinary enough that I'd been thinking about what to make for dinner rather than anything that mattered. I'd applied for a car loan. My 12-year-old Honda had finally given up. and I'd been saving for a down payment on something newer, something that didn't require me to cross my fingers every time I turned the ignition. The dealership had pre-approved me based on my income, and I'd gone in feeling cautiously optimistic, the way you do when you're 31 and you've spent a decade building good credit and living within your means and doing all the things you're supposed to do. The finance manager's name was Derek. He had a mustache and a wedding ring and a framed photo of 2 kids on his desk. And when he pulled up my credit report, his expression shifted in a way that made my stomach drop before he said a single word. "Ms. Brennan, we have a problem." I'd never missed a payment in my life. I had one credit card with a $3,000 limit that I paid off every month. I had a small student loan I'd been methodically chipping away at since graduation. My credit score, last time I'd checked, was 761. According to the report Derek was looking at, I had 7 credit cards I'd never seen before, 3 of them maxed out. A personal loan from a bank I'd never visited. A retail card for a furniture store I'd never set foot in. $78,243.17 in debt. I sat there in that beige office with its artificial plants and motivational posters about success being a journey, and I felt the ground shift beneath me, not metaphorically, literally, like the floor had tilted, and I was sliding toward an edge I couldn't see. "This isn't mine," I heard myself say. This isn't mine." Derek was sympathetic in the professional way that people who've seen this before learn to be sympathetic. He gave me the number for the credit bureaus. He explained the process for disputing fraudulent accounts. He didn't seem surprised, which made everything worse. "It happens more than you'd think," he said. "Usually it's someone who knows you, has access to your information. Usually it's someone who knows you." I drove home in my dying Honda with the check engine light blinking and my hands shaking so badly I had to pull over twice. I called the first credit bureau from a gas station parking lot, my breath fogging in the cold, and started the dispute process while a man in a truck next to me unwrapped a sandwich and watched me with mild curiosity. They gave me access to the full report. They sent me copies of the applications, my name, my social security number, my mother's maiden name as the security question, my childhood address, the one on Maple Street with the blue shutters that I still dreamed about sometimes, and a phone number that wasn't mine. I recognized it immediately. I didn't call Meredith that night. I didn't call anyone. I sat in my apartment with the lights off and the documents spread across my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene, and I tried to make the facts fit into some other story. Any other story. Maybe someone had stolen both our information. Maybe Meredith was a victim too, and we'd discover this together and it would bring us closer. Maybe there was an explanation that didn't require me to accept that my sister had systematically dismantled my financial future, while I was busy sending her birthday cards and accommodating her vacation schedules. But the applications had been submitted over a 3-year period. The first one dated back to right after her divorce, when she'd been living with our parents, when she'd had access to the filing cabinet in their basement where Mom kept all our childhood documents. Social security cards, birth certificates, the detritus of identities, neatly labeled in manila folders. The spending patterns told their own story. Furniture for an apartment I later learned she'd been renting on the other side of town, a place she'd told no one about, a place she'd decorated with my credit while complaining to our parents that she couldn't afford to move out, clothes from stores I'd never shopped at, restaurant charges that mapped to dates I could cross-reference with her Instagram posts. Meredith at brunch, Meredith at dinner, Meredith living a life that looked effortless from the outside. All of it paid for with my name. I went to work the next day because I didn't know what else to do. I sat in meetings and answered emails and smiled at colleagues who asked if I was feeling okay. And the whole time I felt like I was watching myself from very far away. Like the person sitting in that desk wasn't really me, just someone wearing my face, going through the motions of a life that had been hollowed out without her noticing. That night, I called my parents. The conversation went exactly the way conversations with my parents always went, which is to say I came in with facts and left with the vague, unsettling sense that I'd somehow done something wrong. "Sweetie, are you sure?" my mother said when I explained what I'd found. "Meredith's been going through such a hard time." "I'm looking at the credit report right now, Mom. Her phone number is on 6 of these applications." A pause. The sound of my father's voice in the background asking what was going on. My mother's muffled response, too quiet for me to hear. "Let me talk to your sister," she said when she came back. "There must be an explanation." You know how easy it is to mix things up these days, with all the identity theft. This wasn't random identity theft. This was someone with access to my social security number, my mother's maiden name, our childhood address, someone who knows me. Another pause. Longer this time. What are you saying, Natalie? I hadn't wanted to say it. I'd been hoping she'd arrive at the conclusion on her own, that she'd connect the dots without me having to draw the picture explicitly. But I should have known better. I should have remembered that in our family, the dots never connected to Meredith unless someone forced them to. I'm saying I think Meredith did this. The silence that followed was different, colder, like a door closing somewhere far away. That's a very serious accusation. It's not an accusation, I found the evidence, her phone number, Mom, on the applications for accounts I never opened, debt I never incurred, $78,000. Meredith wouldn't do that. The evidence, Natalie. My mother's voice had that quality it got when she'd decided a conversation was over, gentle but immovable, a hand pressing you firmly back into your designated box. I know you're upset, and I understand this is frightening, identity theft is frightening, but to accuse your sister of something like this without even talking to her first, that's not fair to her. I'm not trying to be fair to her. I'm trying to understand how I have $78,000 in debt that isn't mine. Let me talk to Meredith. I'm sure there's an explanation. Maybe someone stole her phone, used her number. For 3 years? I don't know, sweetheart. I don't have all the answers, but I know your sister, and I know she would never hurt you like this. Not intentionally. Not intentionally. As if that made it better. As if intention was the only thing that mattered, and consequences were just details to be worked out later. I'm going to need more than that, Mom. What do you mean? I mean, if Meredith did this, there are going to be consequences. Legal consequences. This is fraud. This is a felony. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When my mother spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. You wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Go to the police, about your sister, about family. If she stole my identity and ran up $78,000 in debt, what else am I supposed to do? You're supposed to handle it privately, like a family. You don't, Natalie, you don't bring the authorities into family matters. You just don't. I closed my eyes, pressed my thumb and forefinger against the bridge of my nose. Felt the familiar exhaustion settling into my bones. The weariness of being the reasonable one. The one expected to absorb every blow and call it love. I need to think about this, I said. Please, my mother said. Please just give us a chance to work it out. Don't do anything rash. Don't ruin everything over something that might be a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. $78,000. 3 years of methodical theft. My credit score in ruins, my car loan denied. My future suddenly uncertain in ways I hadn't anticipated. A misunderstanding. I'll call you tomorrow, I said, and hung up before she could say anything else. Meredith called me an hour later. I didn't answer. She called again, and then the text started. A barrage of messages that I read with the detached fascination of someone watching a car crash in slow motion. Hey, Mom said you're upset about something? Call me Nat, seriously, what's going on? I heard you're having credit problems. That sucks. I'm sorry. Can we just talk about this? Like adults? You can't just accuse me of something and then ignore me. This is exactly what you always do. Make everything about yourself. I'm going through enough right now without you making up stories. Fine, don't answer. I'm not going to beg. I saved the texts. I saved everything. I'd already started learning to document, to preserve evidence, to think like someone who might need to prove their case in court. My mother called the next morning to tell me that Meredith was devastated, that she'd been crying all night, that she couldn't believe her own sister would accuse her of something so horrible. Did she deny it? I asked. She said she didn't know what you were talking about. That's not a denial. It's not an admission either, Natalie. You're treating your sister like a criminal based on circumstantial evidence. Her phone number on fraudulent credit applications isn't circumstantial evidence, it's direct evidence. Anyone could have used her number. That doesn't prove— Mom! I cut her off, something I'd never done before. I need you to hear what I'm saying. Not dismiss it. Not explain it away. Just hear it. She went quiet. $78,000. In my name. With my social security number, which only a handful of people have ever had access to. One of those people is you, one is Dad, one is Meredith, and the applications have her phone number on them. I'm not making up stories, I'm not being dramatic, I'm looking at facts, and the facts point in one direction. So what do you want? Her voice had gone flat, defensive. What do you expect me to do? I expect you to ask Meredith if she did it. Really ask. And if she did, I expect you to stop protecting her long enough for her to face the consequences of what she's done. And if I don't believe she did it, then I guess we'll find out in court. I hung up again. It was becoming a habit, ending conversations before they could end me. The next 2 weeks were a lesson in bureaucracy and isolation. I filed disputes with all 3 credit bureaus. I put fraud alerts on my accounts. I spent hours on hold with creditors who didn't care about my story, who just wanted to know when the payments would resume. I explained over and over that I hadn't made the charges, hadn't opened the accounts, hadn't known any of this was happening until I tried to buy a car. Some of them were sympathetic, most were not. Ma'am, your name is on the account, your social security number. We have records of payments being made for 18 months before the default. Payments I didn't make, from an account I didn't open. Can you prove that? Could I prove that? What would proof even look like? I'd spent 31 years accumulating an identity, a name, a number, a history, and it turned out that none of it belonged to me more than it belonged to anyone else who could fill out an application with the right answers. My parents stopped calling after the first week. I texted my mother once to let her know I was moving forward with a police report, and she responded with 3 words. Please reconsider, sweetheart. I didn't reply. The officer who took my report was a woman about my age with short hair and tired eyes. She listened to everything without interrupting, took notes, asked clarifying questions. She didn't seem shocked, which I was starting to understand was just how people in her position learn to be. Do you know who did this? She asked. I believe it was my sister. She nodded, wrote something down. And you want to proceed with the report knowing that? Yes. Okay. She looked at me for a long moment, something flickering behind her professional neutrality. This is going to be hard. You understand that, right? Family fraud cases they're complicated. Emotionally, legally, people don't always react the way you expect. I know. She nodded again, and something in her expression shifted. A softening, maybe. An acknowledgement that she'd been here before, on the other side of this table, watching someone's family fall apart in slow motion. You're doing the right thing, she said, for what it's worth. It wasn't worth much, but I appreciated it anyway. The investigation took 4 months. 4 months of waiting, of wondering, of watching my life continue as if nothing had happened while everything underneath it slowly collapsed. I couldn't get the car loan, obviously. Couldn't qualify for an apartment when my lease came up either. The property management company took one look at my credit report and suddenly remembered they had no units available. I ended up moving in with a friend from work, sleeping on her pull-out couch, telling everyone I was in between places, as if that were a choice rather than a consequence. My parents didn't call, didn't text, didn't acknowledge my birthday, which fell in the middle of all of it, April 17th, 32 years old, celebrated with a cupcake from a grocery store and a card from my couch-lending friend. Meredith's social media went quiet. I checked, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't help it. Her Instagram, which had been active almost daily, suddenly stopped updating. Her Facebook went dark. I imagined her sitting in a room somewhere, waiting to see what would happen, whether the life she'd built on my credit would come crashing down. I wondered if she was scared, if she was sorry, if she'd ever really thought about what she was doing when she signed my name to those applications, or if she'd told herself some story that made it okay. Natalie won't notice, Natalie can handle it. Natalie always lands on her feet. I wondered if I'd ever know the answers to any of those questions. The detective called me on a Thursday afternoon in July. I was at work, pretending to focus on a spreadsheet that didn't matter, and I nearly dropped my phone when I saw the number. Ms. Brennan, we've completed our investigation. We have enough evidence to move forward with charges. The words felt unreal. I'd been waiting for them, hoping for them, dreading them in equal measure. And now that they'd arrived, I didn't know how to feel. What happens now? The DA's office will review the case and decide on charges. Given the amount involved, we're looking at felony identity theft, felony fraud, and potentially other charges depending on what else surfaces during prosecution. And Meredith? She'll be arrested, arraigned. The process will take time, but, he paused. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. Is there anything you want to ask me? Anything you need to know before this moves forward? I thought about it. There were 100 questions I could have asked, about timelines, about evidence, about what would happen to Meredith if she was convicted. But only one really mattered. Did she confess? A beat of silence. Not exactly. When we interviewed her, she initially denied everything. Then she tried to claim you'd given her permission to open the accounts. Then she said she'd always intended to pay it back. She just hadn't gotten around to it yet. 3 years, $78,000. She just hadn't gotten around to it. Does that count as a confession? It's enough. Combined with the documentary evidence, the phone records, the transaction histories, it's enough. I thanked him, hung up. Sat at my desk for a very long time, staring at the spreadsheet without seeing it, while something inside me slowly rearranged itself into a shape I didn't recognize. The arraignment was scheduled for September 15th. I didn't have to go. The detective told me that, the DA told me that, everyone who knew anything about the process told me that my presence wasn't required and might even make things harder. But I needed to be there. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The machinery of consequences finally catching up with someone who'd spent her whole life evading them. I arrived early. The courthouse was an older building, all marble floors and high ceilings, and the kind of institutional grandeur that was supposed to make you feel small in the presence of justice. I found the right courtroom and took a seat in the back, trying to make myself invisible among the scattered observers and family members waiting for other cases. Meredith came in with her lawyer, a public defender I assumed, though I didn't know for sure. She was wearing a gray dress I'd never seen before, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger and more vulnerable. She didn't look at the gallery, didn't scan the room for friendly faces, just walked to the defendant's table and sat down like she'd done this 100 times before. I was so focused on watching her that I didn't notice my parents until they were already seated 3 rows ahead of me. My mother, my father, dressed like they were going to church, sitting with their shoulders touching, their faces arranged in matching expressions of grim determination. They weren't there for me. That realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd known intellectually that they'd sided with Meredith, that they'd stopped speaking to me, stopped acknowledging my existence, stopped treating me as a member of the family. But knowing it and seeing it were different things. They were here to support her, the person who'd stolen from me, the person who'd destroyed my credit, my stability, my sense of safety in the world. They'd chosen her, again, still, always. I should have left. That would have been the smart thing, the self-protective thing, but I stayed. I stayed because I'd spent 32 years leaving every room where my presence made things uncomfortable for Meredith, and I was done leaving. The judge called the case. The lawyer spoke in the clipped, ritualistic language of courtroom procedure. Meredith stood when she was supposed to stand, said when she was supposed to sit, said yes, Your Honor, and not guilty, Your Honor, in a voice that was smaller than I'd ever heard it. And then, just before the judge moved on to scheduling matters, my mother stood up. Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to speak on behalf of my daughter. A ripple of murmured surprise moved through the courtroom. The judge looked up from her paperwork, eyebrows raised. Ma'am, this is an arraignment, not a sentencing hearing. Character witnesses. I understand, Your Honor, but there's been a terrible misunderstanding and I feel it's my duty as her mother to… Ma'am, the judge's voice had gone flat. Please sit down. My mother hesitated, her face flushing. My father reached up and touched her arm, urging her back into her seat. But she'd already said it. I'd like to speak on behalf of my daughter, and the judge had already heard it. For the record, the judge said, her gaze moving slowly across the courtroom. Are there any other family members present who wish to make statements? My father raised his hand, slow, deliberate, like he was answering a question in a church service. I'm the defendant's father and the alleged victim's father. I'd like it noted that we don't support these charges, that we believe this is a family matter that should have been handled privately. The room went still. I could feel people looking around trying to figure out who the alleged victim was, where she was sitting. I kept my eyes on the judge, watching her face as she processed what my father had just said. She removed her reading glasses, set them down on the bench with a soft click. When she spoke, her voice was careful and precise, like someone choosing each word with surgical attention. Let me make sure I understand. You're here to support your daughter, she glanced at Meredith, who has been charged with stealing $78,000 from your other daughter. Is that correct? My father nodded. Family matters should stay within the family. And you're not here to support the daughter who was victimized by this alleged theft? Something shifted in my father's face. A flicker of uncertainty, there and gone. Natalie made her choice when she went to the police instead of coming to us. The judge looked at him for a long moment. Then her gaze swept across the gallery until it found me, the woman sitting alone in the back row, watching her family testify against her. And which daughter is Natalie? I didn't say anything, didn't have to. My face must have said everything because the judge's expression softened almost imperceptibly before she turned back to my parents. I have one question for you both, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. My mother gripped my father's hand. Meredith hadn't moved, hadn't turned around, was still staring, straight ahead, like the statue of someone who'd learned long ago that stillness was a form of survival. The judge leaned forward slightly. If the situation were reversed, if Natalie had stolen $78,000 from Meredith, would you be sitting here telling me this was a family matter that should have been handled privately? The question hung in the air like smoke. I watched my mother's face change, watched the words land, watched them sink through all the layers of justification and denial and well-meaning blindness. Watched her understand, perhaps for the first time, exactly what she'd done by showing up in this courtroom to defend the daughter who had taken everything from the daughter who had never taken anything at all. She started to cry. Not the dramatic tears from earlier, not the crying because things are happening tears. These were different, quieter, the tears of someone who's just been shown a mirror and can't look away from what they see. My father put his arm around her, but his face had gone pale, and he didn't answer the question. Neither of them did. The judge waited a moment longer, then turned back to the defendant's table. Bail is set at $25,000. Trial date will be scheduled for November 3rd. The defendant is remanded to custody until bail is posted. We're adjourned. The gavel came down. The court officer moved toward Meredith, and for the first time since she'd entered the room, my sister turned and looked at the gallery. She found our parents first, then slowly her gaze tracked backward until it landed on me. I don't know what I expected to see in her face. Guilt, maybe, shame, anger, some acknowledgement that what she'd done had consequences that extended beyond her own immediate suffering. Instead, I saw something worse, confusion, like she genuinely couldn't understand why I was here, why I'd done this, why I hadn't just let it go, absorbed the damage, protected the family the way I'd always protected the family, like I was the one who'd broken something precious, and she was the one who'd have to pick up the pieces. They led her away. My parents followed, not looking back, disappearing through a side door that I assumed led to whatever room you went to when you needed to post bail for your criminal daughter. I sat in my seat until the courtroom emptied, until the next case was called and a whole new set of families filed in with their own particular configurations of love and betrayal. Then I gathered my things and walked out into the September sunshine, and I kept walking until I found a bench in a small park 3 blocks away, and I sat there for a very long time. The judge's question kept echoing in my head. If the situation were reversed, but it wouldn't have been reversed. That was the thing. It couldn't have been reversed, because the situation required a Meredith and a Natalie, a person who took and a person who absorbed, a person who demanded and a person who accommodated. The roles had been assigned so long ago that none of us could remember a time before them. And now, finally, I'd refused to play my part. I didn't know what would happen next. Whether my parents would call, whether they'd apologize, whether anything would ever be the same between us, whether Meredith would be convicted, what her sentence would be, whether I'd ever see a penny of the money she'd stolen. But sitting there on that bench, watching strangers walk their dogs and push their strollers and live their ordinary lives, I realized something that felt like the first true thing I'd known in a very long time. I wasn't angry at Meredith. I wasn't even angry at my parents. I was just tired. Bone deep, soul deep, tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying a weight so long you've forgotten what it feels like to stand up straight. And for the first time in my life, I set it down. The trial lasted 3 days. Meredith's lawyer tried everything, claimed I'd given verbal permission for the accounts, claimed the evidence was circumstantial, claimed the amounts weren't as high as reported, claimed that I had my own financial problems that I was trying to blame on my sister. None of it stuck. The documentation was too thorough, the paper trail too clear. She'd used my identity to fund a life she couldn't afford, and the evidence was undeniable. My parents didn't come to the trial, not a single day. I don't know if they couldn't face it or if they'd finally accepted that their presence wouldn't change the outcome. Either way, their absence felt like its own kind of verdict. I testified on the second day, walked through the timeline, the discovery, the impact on my life, answered questions about my relationship with my sister, about who had access to my personal information, about what I'd done when I first discovered the fraud. The prosecutor asked me how finding out had affected me emotionally. I thought about the nights I'd spent unable to sleep, the anxiety attacks in grocery stores when my card declined, the shame of explaining to my friend why I needed to crash on her couch, the birthday that passed without a single word from my family. It broke something, I said. Not just my credit, not just my finances. It broke my understanding of who my family was, who my sister was, who I was in relation to all of them. I didn't cry. I'd cried enough in private. I wasn't going to give anyone the satisfaction of my tears in public. Meredith was convicted on all counts: identity theft, credit card fraud. The judge sentenced her to 4 years with the possibility of parole after 2. Restitution was ordered, though everyone acknowledged it would take years, maybe decades, for me to see any of that money. She stood there in her orange jumpsuit. They'd kept her in custody when her bail was revoked after she tried to flee the state before the trial. And she listened to the sentence with the same blank expression she'd worn throughout the proceedings. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she turned and looked directly at me. "I'm sorry, Nat," she said. "I really am. I never meant for it to go this far." I nodded, not forgiveness, not acceptance, just acknowledgement that she'd spoken. I never meant for it to go this far. That was probably true. She probably hadn't planned any of it, not the scale of it, not the duration, not the eventual discovery. She'd probably told herself, with each new application, that this would be the last one, that she'd pay it back, that I'd never know, that it didn't really count as stealing if it was from family, but intentions don't erase consequences. And whatever she'd meant to do, what she'd actually done was burn down 30 years of sisterhood for furniture and restaurant meals and a life that looked good on Instagram. They led her away. I walked out of the courthouse into a gray November afternoon, and I drove to my friend's apartment, and I started packing the few boxes of belongings I'd accumulated during my months of displacement. I'd finally been approved for an apartment of my own. A small place, nothing special, but mine. The fraud alerts and credit dispute processes had worked their way through the system. My score was still damaged, but improving. I was rebuilding. One piece at a time, one day at a time. Alone but no longer crushed under the weight of pretending everything was fine. My mother called on Christmas Eve. Was sitting in my new apartment, surrounded by secondhand furniture and a small tree I'd bought from a lot down the street. I'd declined invitations from friends and coworkers, not because I wanted to be alone, but because I wasn't ready to pretend that the holidays meant something they didn't. Her number appeared on my screen, and I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Natalie?" Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "It's Mom." "I know." A long silence. The kind of silence that stretches across years of unspoken things. "I wanted to call. I've wanted to call for months. I just didn't know what to say." "You could have said that when I called you about the fraud. You could have said you believed me." "I know." She was crying again. I could hear it in the way her breath caught between words. "I know, and I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry I couldn't." What the word came out harder than I intended. "Why couldn't you believe me? Why was it so impossible to consider that Meredith had done something wrong?" The silence stretched longer this time. I waited. "Because if I believed it," my mother finally said, "I'd have to believe I'd raised a daughter who could do something like that. And I couldn't. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who..." She broke off, collected herself, tried again. She was always so fragile, from the time she was little, so easily hurt, so sensitive to everything. And you were so strong, so capable. I told myself that leaning on you, protecting her, that it would all balance out somehow, that you could handle more because you were built for more. I closed my eyes, pressed my phone against my ear. and felt the years of accommodation and sacrifice and deliberate smallness pressing against my chest. That wasn't fair to me. I know. And it wasn't fair to Meredith either. You taught her that consequences weren't real, that someone would always clean up her messes, that she could take whatever she wanted because family meant never having to face what you'd done. My mother didn't argue, didn't defend, just cried quietly on the other end of the line. I don't know how to fix this, she said. I don't know if it can be fixed. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. What I did, what we all did, and I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry, Natalie. I thought about the judge's question, the one that had made my mother cry in that courtroom, that had cracked open something she'd spent decades sealing shut. If the situation were reversed. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said. Not yet, maybe not ever, but I appreciate you calling. I appreciate you saying it. Will you? She hesitated. Will you let me try? To be better? To be the mother I should have been all along? I looked around my small apartment, my second-hand couch, my grocery store tree, the quiet life I was building out of the wreckage of everything I thought I could count on. Maybe, I said, but it has to be different this time. No more pretending, no more protecting Meredith from the consequences of what she's done, no more expecting me to absorb things because I'm the strong one. Yes, whatever you need, I promise. Promises from my mother had never meant much, but this one sounded different, heavier, like she understood for the first time what she was committing to. I have to go, I said. Merry Christmas, Mom. Merry Christmas, sweetheart, I love you. I hung up without saying it back. Not to be cruel, but because I wasn't ready. Because love in my family had been a currency that bought silence and acceptance, and the right to take whatever you needed from the people who had no choice but to let you. I was learning a different kind of love now, the kind that included boundaries, the kind that didn't require me to disappear. Meredith sent me a letter from prison. It arrived on a Tuesday in February, unremarkable, like most of the pivotal moments in this story. A plain white envelope with a state correctional facility stamp in the corner, my name and address written in handwriting I'd known my entire life. I didn't open it right away. Let it sit on my kitchen counter for 3 days while I went to work, made dinner, watched television, lived my ordinary life around the ghost of my sister's words waiting to be read. When I finally opened it, the letter was 6 pages long, handwritten, cramped, the margins filled with afterthoughts and additions. Meredith had always written like she talked, in spirals circling this point, never quite arriving. She didn't apologize again, or rather, she apologized for the wrong things. I'm sorry I got caught. I'm sorry I put you in this position. I'm sorry our family is broken now. As if the breaking was something that had happened to us, rather than something she'd done. She told me about prison, about the monotony, the food, the other women on her cell block. She told me she was taking classes, getting her GED she'd never finished, thinking about what she wanted to do when she got out. She told me she missed me. I know I don't have the right to miss you, she wrote, but I do. You were always the best part of our family, Nat. The one who held everything together. The one who made it work. The one who held everything together. The one who made it work. I folded the letter and put it back in its envelope. I didn't write back. Maybe someday I would. Maybe someday I'd find the words to explain to Meredith exactly what she'd taken from me, exactly how it felt to have my own name turned into a weapon against my future. Maybe someday I'd forgive her, or at least find some version of peace with what had happened. But not today. Today, I had a life to rebuild, credit to repair, trust to learn how to place in people again. And I couldn't do any of that while carrying Meredith's need to be understood, her need to be forgiven, her need to have someone tell her it was all going to be okay. That had never been my job. I just hadn't known it until now. Spring came slowly that year. The trees outside my apartment building budded, then bloomed, then filled with leaves that cast dancing shadows on my walls. I got a promotion at work, started dating someone, cautiously, carefully, with all my walls up and a clear explanation on the second date about why my credit score was still recovering. He took it well, better than I expected. Said his ex-wife had done something similar to him, and he understood how it felt to have someone you trusted turn your own identity against you. We're still together as of this writing, taking it slow, learning each other's damage, making space for it, trying to build something that doesn't require either of us to pretend we're undamaged. My mother and I talk once a week. Careful, deliberate conversations that skirt the edges of everything that happened. She's in therapy now, first time in her life, trying to understand how she became the kind of mother who could stand in a courtroom and defend her daughter's abuser. I don't know if she'll ever get there, but she's trying, and that means something. My father and I don't talk. He never called after that Christmas Eve conversation, and I've stopped expecting him to. Some gaps are too wide to bridge, and some people are too committed to their own version of reality to ever see yours. And Meredith? Meredith is still in prison. Another year before she's eligible for parole. She sends letters every few months, and I read them, and I don't respond. Maybe that's cruel. Maybe it's necessary. I'm still figuring out the difference. Last week, I pulled up my credit report for the first time since the trial ended. It's become a ritual now, checking every few months, watching the slow recovery of something that shouldn't have needed recovering in the first place. My score is back above 700. The fraudulent accounts have been removed, the disputes resolved, the paper trail cleaned up. To anyone looking at the numbers, I'm a reasonable credit risk again. A person who can be trusted with a car loan, a lease, a credit card, but I know the truth. I know what it looks like underneath, the scars, the rebuilt foundations, the places where the structure is still settling. I know that some damage doesn't show up on reports, doesn't translate into numbers, can't be disputed away with the right forms and enough patience. I know what it costs to rebuild a life that someone else dismantled. I know what it costs to choose yourself when everyone you love is telling you not to. I know what it costs to sit in a courtroom and watch your parents defend the person who hurt you, and then get up the next day, and the day after that, and keep going anyway. I've paid that cost. I'm still paying it. And I've learned something that nobody else can teach you, something that only comes from living through the unlivable. You don't owe anyone your destruction, not your parents, not your sister, not the family stories about who you're supposed to be and how much you're supposed to sacrifice. You don't owe anyone the right to dismantle you, piece by piece, just because they share your blood or your history or your last name. You get to choose yourself. You get to protect yourself. You get to walk away from people who confuse love with permission to take whatever they need. And if that makes you the villain in someone else's story, if your mother cries in a courtroom because a judge asked her to consider what fairness actually looks like, then maybe the story was never about you at all. Maybe you were always just a character in someone else's narrative, playing a role that served everyone's interests but your own. I don't know how this story ends. It hasn't ended yet. It's still happening, every day, in the slow accumulation of choices and consequences that make up a life. Meredith will get out of prison eventually. My parents will continue to grapple with what they did and didn't do. I'll keep rebuilding, keep healing, keep learning what it means to be someone who doesn't disappear to make room for others. But I know how this chapter ends. It ends with me, sitting at my kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, looking out the window at a tree in full leaf, a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, a letter from my sister unopened in the drawer by the door, a man I'm learning to trust asleep in the next room, a job that values me, a life that's entirely my own. It ends with me choosing every day to believe that I deserve all of it. My sister stole my identity. My parents asked me to forgive her. A judge asked one question that made my mother cry. But that's not really what this story is about. It's about the moment you stop waiting for permission to exist. The moment you stop making yourself small so someone else can feel big. The moment you look at the people who are supposed to love you and say, "Not like this. I won't be loved like this anymore." That moment doesn't feel like victory. It doesn't feel like revenge or justice or any of the things you're supposed to want when someone wrongs you. It just feels like the ground finally steadying beneath your feet, like you're standing on something solid for the first time in your life. I still have the documents, all of them. The credit applications with Meredith's phone number, the dispute forms, the court transcripts, everything. I keep them in a folder in my closet. Not because I think I'll ever need them again, but because they're proof. Proof that it happened. Proof that I survived it. Proof that I chose myself, once, when choosing myself was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Some nights, I take the folder out and just hold it. Feel the weight of all that paper, all that evidence of a life that almost wasn't mine anymore. And then I put it back, close the closet door, and go to bed. I sleep better now than I have in years. Not because everything is resolved. Not because all the wounds have healed, or all the relationships have mended, or all the money has been repaid, but because I know, with a certainty I didn't have before, that I'm capable of doing hard things, of making impossible choices, of surviving the consequences of my own integrity. My mother asked me once, after one of our careful, deliberate phone calls, if I regretted it. Filing the police report, pressing charges, letting my family fracture instead of holding it together the way I'd always held it together before. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. I regret that it was necessary, I finally said. But I don't regret doing it. She was quiet. Then, I don't think I would have been that brave. It wasn't brave, I said. It was just the only choice I could live with. And that's the truth, the whole truth, the only truth that matters, in the end. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop being brave for everyone else. Stop holding together things that want to fall apart. Stop pretending that love means letting people destroy you slowly, quietly, with your own name on the paperwork. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may. Even if your mother cries in court, even if your father never speaks to you again, even if your sister writes letters from prison that you never answer, asking you to understand, to forgive, to be the Natalie she always knew, the strong one, the capable one, the one who absorbed everything so everyone else could be okay. You can put those letters in a drawer. You can close the drawer. You can go outside into the ordinary afternoon and breathe the ordinary air and remind yourself that you don't owe anyone an answer. You don't owe anyone anything. You never did. The weight of my name used to feel like something imposed, a burden I inherited, a role I was assigned. Daughter, sister, the strong one, the accommodating one, the girl who moved her wedding date, who apologized for winning, who shrank and shrank until she nearly disappeared. Now it feels like something I've claimed, something I've fought for and earned and rebuilt from the wreckage. My name is Natalie Brennan. I'm 33 years old. I have an apartment with a tree outside my window, a credit score that's slowly climbing back to where it belongs, and a life that nobody gave me. I made it myself, from the pieces left behind when my sister took everything else. And that, I've learned, is more than enough.